Did you hear that the USSR waited long before acting on the Chernobyl disaster? That's only a partial truth. The first calls reached the leaders of the Ukrainian SR and the USSR within 30 minutes after the explosions in Chernobyl happened. So, what exactly did they do after learning about the accident? What decisions did they make? Who did they inform? Let's sum up what you already heard in this miniseries. Shortly, of course, as the last few episodes had over 10 minutes each, and you can find the details there. When the explosions happened in Unit 4 at Chernobyl nuclear power plant, there was a lot of confusion and misinformation. All the bureaucratic way was holding back reports from reaching the highest levels of power in the Kremlin. They reached Gorbachev and other important persons, but slower than they probably should have. Despite that, the USSR had sent 3 teams to Chernobyl. However harsh this sounds, the Soviet Union was accustomed to nuclear accidents. They had specialists who worked partially in particular squads, like OPAS, an emergency response team created by the Ministry of Energy. Each of those 3 teams sent to Chernobyl was composed of different specialists, and you could say that these teams had a different status. The first was a quick response team led by Boris Prushinsky, OPAS leader. The second one was formed by Anatoly Mayorets, Soviet Minister of Energy and Electrification. The team was a middle ground between the first and the third ones. The minister gathered additional experts to support and oversee Prushinsky's group. The third team was led by Boris Shcherbina, and it included senior experts like Valery Legasov. This was actually a government commission and was created with the purpose of taking control over the teams that were already in Chernobyl or in transit. Also, people in power in Ukraine and the power plant management knew that they had to cooperate fully and assist in any way required. What should be really underlined is that although it looks like a well-prepared response to the nuclear accident, it was actually a typical action taken by the Soviet Union leaders. They were misinformed from the start. They were being told there is nothing to be worried about, and however the accident was serious, it wasn't a high-profile threat. The other thing was that the experts on every team were handpicked from the supporters of the government and socialistic values. That ensured the leak of any controversial information was minimal. So, if we have this quick summary done, it's time for another episode. This time, we will jump to the very beginning of post-accident events. I will tell you about the night call from Chernobyl. Let's start. The People of Chernobyl. Part 6. The Terrifying Night Call. I've told you about Boris Prushinsky a few times before. He was the leader of OPAS and the leader of the first team that arrived in Chernobyl. But it really gives some perspective when you know how and when he heard about the disaster. The second important character during the first moments after the disaster happened is Vitaly Sklyarov, the Ukrainian Republic's Minister of Energy, a counterpart of Moscow's Anatoly Mayorets. You should also know him from the previous episodes. A few minutes after the explosions at Chernobyl nuclear power plant, at about 1:30 a.m. on April 26, 1986, Vitaly Sklyarov was lying in his bed. Despite he couldn't sleep, the message he received was far from anything he could have imagined. The dispatcher from the Ukrainian grid was monitoring the distribution of electricity, so getting a call from him at that time of night was a sign that something serious was going on. Sklyarov, a career politician, sacrificed over 15 years to work his way through the corrupt Soviet system. From a junior technician at a coal-fired power plant, then as a station director and later chief engineer of the Kyiv Electricity Board, finally securing the position of the energy minister. He deeply believed in communist ideals, which often was a crucial part of getting promoted to higher positions within any important state structures, like the ministries or agencies. His work let him travel far beyond the USSR, but also to meet with many different operatives of special services, like the KGB. This was not less important than his beliefs, especially because it let him learn how to move through the political swamp of the Soviet Union. Even though he was an experienced engineer and politician, the first seconds after hearing who was calling him at this hour, he hoped to hear there was no casualties. Learning the matter was Chernobyl power plant, he knew what could have happened. He helped to open the station. He knew Efim Slavsky and Anatoly Alexandrov, the fathers of the RBMK reactors. Also, he remembered the accident that happened a few years earlier, the meltdown in Unit 1 at Chernobyl, in 1982. But what he heard now was something far more important. It sounded way worse than what he could have expected. There has been a series of operational disturbances at the Chernobyl nuclear power plant. These were the first words Sklarov heard. He learned that the fire broke out in the main hall and the turbine hall in the Unit 4 building. And most importantly, the contact with the plant was lost. As he was supposed to, Sklarov immediately called Alexander Lyashko. The Ukrainian Prime Minister was not hesitating. He told Vitaly to pass the grave news to Politburo at once. Ukrainian Politburo was unofficially run by Vladimir Shcherbitsky, leader of the Ukrainian Socialist Republic, a veteran of politics and a close person to previous Soviet Union leader, Leonid Brezhnev. This meant that he was not the easygoing type. He was rather a hard-headed politician standing against any reforms of the ways of Gorbachev, the current USSR leader. Shcherbitsky left for a weekend and was very clear about not being disturbed at all. Despite that, Sklarov reached him. Half asleep, the first secretary mumbled one sentence. What happened? The time was against them. It was crucial to deal with any nuclear incident as fast as possible, especially since the Soviet Union and its supporters behind the Iron Curtain were in a Cold War against the countries of the West. Any news about a nuclear accident happening in the mighty USSR could be used by their enemies quickly to discredit their nuclear program. The first emergency calls reached Moscow in less than 30 minutes after the disaster in Chernobyl happened. Despite that was a high-profile situation, so the procedures had to be kept. This meant the flow of information was slow, the censorship was watching over any report coming in, even though it could be useful for the party leaders to know exactly what happened. The secured lines rang at the USSR Ministry of Energy, Ministry of Health, and Ministry of Defense, and slowly started to make a fuss around the problem. Simultaneously, the Ministry of Internal Affairs from Kiev notified the local KGB, Civil Defense, and Public Prosecutor. In turn, they notified their counterparts in Moscow. This weird maze of cross-calling separate divisions, ministries, and agencies was not helping. Every person involved was somehow responsible for the information that was reported. In the corrupt system, this meant if anyone reporting anything felt like he could be held responsible, he could change the report slightly to separate himself from the situation. Finally, the news reached Boris Prushinsky, chief engineer of Soyuz Atomenergo, which was the Department of Nuclear Power within the Ministry of Energy in Moscow. As the head of the OPAS, the emergency response team created recently to deal with any nuclear incidents at the USSR's atomic stations, it was normal practice to notify him as quickly as possible. It was obvious that he would be one of the first people to be sent to the place of the incident. He was in his own bed when was suddenly woken up by a call from the duty operator from his department. She told him that there had been an accident in the Chernobyl nuclear power plant. She read the special code used to describe the severity of the situation. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. It was the middle of the night, so he was barely awake. He couldn't remember what those meant at the moment. Any casualties? A fire? A general accident? A local one? Any radiation? With all his directness, he asked with a somewhat irritated tone. Tell me normally. What happened? It was 1:50 a.m. and he didn't suppose that within the next 48 hours, he would witness something out of this world. In his worst nightmares, he couldn't suspect what will he see in Chernobyl. His imagination and experience, although very broad, didn't let him anticipate that soon he would stand so close to destroyed Unit 4 building. Close to the remains of the RBMK reactor, which was a jewel in the USSR's nuclear crown. The RBMK reactor couldn't explode. Yet, Boris Prushinsky saw that it did. I hope you've enjoyed this episode as much as I did. Honestly, it always makes me feel a bit disturbed when I read about how the disaster was handled. From our perspective, it's easy to say what they should have done immediately, but we have the privilege of knowing most of the facts. Nonetheless, I'm often wondering if there was anything they could have done differently, especially regarding the corruption and all the faults of the Soviet system. I have to add that if you are interested in Chernobyl, you can really enjoy our game, Chernobylite. And if you're not into games that much, you can always try Chernobyl VR, which is basically a tour around the exclusion zone we made a few years back. Either way, please watch the previous episodes if you haven't. I tried to make all these episodes kind of standalone, so you will know much more even by watching only this one. On the other hand, you won't get the overall situation well enough without linking all the information I gave you in the last episodes. As always, leave a comment if you want to ask anything specific. If you want to know more about a particular subject, feel free to suggest it. For example, I heard a lot of questions about the miners, the liquidators, or the operators. Don't worry, we're just starting the Chernobyl disaster history day by day, sometimes hour by hour, or even minute by minute. Sometimes I jump between the parts of the story, but I do it to make it clear and/or interesting, as the books and reports I've read, the documentaries I've watched, are sometimes very hard to go through. So I hope you don't mind if there is no specific timeline, as I would like to spare you the sometimes painful learning. Instead, I would like you to enjoy these videos as much as you can. That's it for today, guys. Take care, stay safe, and see you next week.